The year is 1975. America is in a period of uneasy transition, caught between the lingering shadows of Vietnam and Watergate and the neon-hued dawn of a new cultural era. In the heart of Pennsylvania Dutch country, Lancaster County exists as a world apart, a patchwork of rolling farmland and stoic, traditional communities. Here, life moves at a different pace, governed by the seasons and a deeply ingrained sense of order. The borough of Manor Township, in particular, is a picture of post-war American tranquility. It's a place of neatly manicured lawns where neighbors know each other by name, and the most pressing local news might be the outcome of the high school football game. It is a world built on the bedrock assumption of safety, a place where people leave their doors unlocked and children play freely in the streets until dusk. This profound sense of peace, however, is a fragile thing. It is a delicate membrane of shared trust, and in the winter of 1975, it is about to be punctured by a single, incomprehensible act of violence, an act so brutal it would introduce a kind of fear this community had never known and leave a wound that would fester for nearly half a century. If you want to hear more true crime stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Into this world of quiet certainty, Lindy Sue Biechler shone with a particular brightness. At 19, she embodied the very essence of youthful hope and vitality. She wasn't merely a resident of this peaceful community. She was one of its blossoms. To her family, she was the laughter that filled a room, the dependable daughter who never forgot a birthday. To her friends from Conestoga Valley High School, she was a study in gentle kindness, her smile a quick and genuine thing, her spirit open and without artifice. She had recently taken a job at a local flower shop, a role that seemed perfectly suited to her nature, surrounded by beauty, helping to craft bouquets meant to celebrate life's most precious moments. Her recent marriage to her husband, Phil, was the joyful centerpiece of her young life. They were a quintessential young couple, navigating the early days of their life together in their small apartment at the Chateau Terrace complex. Their home was a canvas for their future, a place filled with wedding gifts and the humble beginnings of a shared dream. In those early December days, the apartment would have smelled of pine from a freshly bought Christmas wreath and the faint, sweet scent of the flowers she might have brought home from work. Their conversations were likely filled with the small, important details of building a life. Plans for the holidays, saving for a house, the simple, optimistic chatter of two people in love, completely unaware that their story was not at the beginning of a long and happy chapter, but at the precipice of a horrific, unwritten end. December 5th, 1975, dawns as an ordinary Friday. The air holds the sharp, clean bite of impending winter. Lindy Sue follows the familiar rhythm of her day. She works her shift at the flower shop, her hands deftly arranging carnations and baby's breath. Later, she makes her way to the grocery store, the aisles bustling with people stocking up for the weekend. The items in her cart are a mundane poem of domestic life: milk, bread, a carton of eggs, ingredients for dinner. It is the last normal act of a life about to be violently torn from its moorings. She drives home, pulling into the parking lot of her apartment complex. She carries the brown paper bags upstairs, the familiar weight of them a comforting routine. Inside, the quiet of the apartment greets her. Her husband is at work, not due home for hours. The groceries are placed on the kitchen table, waiting to be put away. Perhaps she turns on the radio, filling the silence with the top 40 hits of the day. She is home. She is safe. Or so she believes. The sanctuary of her own home is a lie. Outside this small circle of light and warmth, a profound darkness is gathering, a malevolent presence that is about to cross her threshold and extinguish her bright, promising life with a savagery that defies all reason. There are no signs of a forced entry. This single, chilling fact will become one of the most obsessive points of the investigation. It suggests a disarming lack of alarm, a moment of trust that was fatally betrayed. Did the knock on the door come from a familiar face, a neighbor, a supposed friend? Or was it a stranger with a plausible story, a ruse that granted him access to her home and to her life? Whatever the method, the moment the door closed behind him, the apartment transformed from a sanctuary into a cage. The ensuing struggle is a symphony of terror. It is the desperate, primal fight of a young woman battling for her very existence against an explosion of incomprehensible rage. The evidence left behind paints a visceral, horrifying picture. Overturned furniture, scattered belongings, the chaotic debris of a life and death struggle. The weapon is not something the killer brought with him. It is a knife from her own kitchen, a simple tool for preparing meals, now turned into an instrument of butchery. It is used against her 19 times. Each stab is a punctuation mark in a statement of pure, unadulterated hatred. The violence is intimate, personal, and absolute. The vibrant life of Lindy Sue Biechler, a life filled with flowers and love and plans for the future, is silenced on her own floor. The silence that follows is heavy and absolute. Hours pass. The groceries sit on the table, a silent testament to a life interrupted. Evening deepens into night. For Lindy Sue's aunt and uncle, a thread of worry begins to weave itself into their evening. They had plans to meet up, and Lindy, always so reliable, is uncharacteristically out of touch. Calls to the apartment go unanswered, each ring echoing in the empty rooms, each unanswered call amplifying their concern. Finally, unable to shake a growing sense of dread, they drive over to the Chateau Terrace apartments. The building is quiet, wrapped in the typical stillness of a suburban Friday night. They climb the stairs to Lindy's apartment and knock on the door. The silence from within is unnerving. They try the knob. It's unlocked. They push the door open and step inside, calling her name. The sight that greets them is a waking nightmare, a scene of such profound horror that it will be seared into their minds for the rest of their lives. The neat, cozy apartment they knew is in disarray, a clear sign of a violent struggle. And then they see her. In the midst of the chaos lies Lindy Sue, her body still, the life gone from her. The scene is a tableau of unspeakable brutality, but one detail stands out in its ghastly finality. The knife, one of her own steak knives, is still protruding from her neck, a grotesque marker of the final, fatal blow. The air is stolen from their lungs. The sound that escapes is not a word, but a primal scream of grief and disbelief, a sound that rips through the quiet night, announcing to the world that a monster had walked among them. Within minutes, the quiet solitude of the Chateau Terrace apartments is shattered by the piercing wail of sirens. The arrival of the first Manor Township police officers marks the beginning of a half-century journey into darkness. The initial scene is one of controlled chaos. The patrolmen secure the perimeter, their faces grim masks of professionalism, barely concealing the shock of what they've witnessed. This isn't a robbery gone wrong. The level of violence is too personal, too extreme. This is something else entirely. Detectives arrive, their trench coats pulled tight against the December chill. They step across the threshold into Lindy Sue's apartment, and for them, the world shrinks to the size of these few rooms. This is the sacred ground of the investigation, a place where the victim's last moments are frozen in time and where the ghost of her killer has left his faint, invisible traces. The forensic team begins its meticulous, painstaking work. In 1975, their tools are rudimentary by today's standards. There is no DNA analysis, no vast computer databases to cross-reference. Their work is a slow, methodical process of observation and collection. Flashbulbs pop, momentarily illuminating the horror in stark, clinical detail. They dust for fingerprints on every conceivable surface: the doorknob, the kitchen counter, the telephone, the handle of the knife itself. They collect fibers from the carpet, hairs, anything that seems out of place. They carefully examine the body, noting the position and nature of the wounds, looking for defensive injuries that could tell the story of her final, desperate fight. The air grows thick with the smell of fingerprint powder and the metallic tang of blood. Every item collected is carefully placed in a paper bag, labeled and logged. Each one is a potential key, a single, silent witness that might one day unlock the truth. The detectives watch this grim ballet, their minds racing, trying to build a narrative from the chaos. They see the groceries on the table and surmise she was attacked shortly after arriving home. They see the lack of forced entry and theorize she knew her killer. They see the ferocity of the attack and they know they are not hunting for a common criminal, they are hunting for a monster. The day after the murder, the official investigation begins in earnest, and one of the first, most painful tasks is to interview the family. Lindy Sue's aunt sits in a sterile, impersonal room at the police station. The shock of the previous night has subsided into a thick, suffocating fog of grief. Detective Miller, a seasoned investigator whose kind eyes have seen more than their share of human cruelty, sits across from her. His voice is gentle, but his questions are necessarily sharp, probing. He needs to know everything. He starts with the timeline. What time did you last speak to her? What were her plans? Did she mention anyone coming over? Each question is a small, painful jab, forcing her to relive the mundane details of the day before the horror. She recounts their last phone call, the casual conversation, the plans they had made. Her voice breaks. Detective Miller pushes gently. Did Lindy ever mention anyone she was afraid of? Anyone who had been bothering her? A new friend? An old boyfriend? Anyone at all? The aunt shakes her head, her mind a frantic blur. She tries to grasp at memories, to find a face, a name that could possibly fit the monster who did this. But there is nothing. Lindy was loved, she was happy, she had no enemies. The detective then has to ask the hardest question, the one that feels like a violation. He asks her to describe the moment she found her niece. The words catch in her throat. She describes pushing open the unlocked door, the sight of the overturned lamp, and then she stops. The image of Lindy, of the knife, is too terrible to conjure, too monstrous to put into words. She breaks down, her body racked with sobs, the full weight of the trauma crashing down upon her. In that moment, she is not just a witness for the police, she is a primary victim of the crime, a woman whose sense of safety in the world has been permanently shattered, forever haunted by what lay behind that apartment door. As the days turn into weeks, the investigation intensifies, but a clear path forward remains elusive. The forensic analysis of the physical evidence yields frustratingly little. The fingerprints collected at the scene either belong to Lindy Sue and her husband, or are too smudged to be identifiable. The fibers and hairs collected offer no immediate clues. With no forensic leads, the detectives focus on human intelligence. They cast a wide net, interviewing and re-interviewing dozens of people, friends, neighbors, co-workers, and past acquaintances. They are looking for a motive, for a secret in Lindy's life that could explain this explosion of violence, but they find nothing. Her life appears to be exactly what it seemed, a happy, ordinary existence, devoid of the dark entanglements that often lead to murder. The pressure on the department is immense. The local papers run daily updates, their headlines screaming about the brutal slaying and the lack of progress. The community, once a haven of tranquility, is now gripped by a palpable fear. A ghost is loose in Manor Township, a killer who could be anyone, a neighbor, a co-worker, a friend. In the absence of facts, rumors begin to swirl, filling the vacuum with speculation and suspicion. With every passing day, the trail grows colder. The detectives develop a list of persons of interest, a collection of names born from whispers and circumstantial connections. One such person is a local man with a history of petty crime and a reputation for a volatile temper. He lived not far from the Chateau Terrace apartments and had no solid alibi for the night of the murder. The detectives bring him in. The interrogation room is small and claustrophobic. Detective Miller and his partner sit across a small metal table from the suspect. The man is jittery, defiant. The questioning begins calmly, methodically. They ask him where he was on the night of December 5th. He gives a vague answer about being at a bar, but he can't remember which one or who he was with. The detectives press him, their tone hardening. They point out inconsistencies in his story. They tell him a witness saw his car near the apartment complex. It's a bluff, a classic interrogation technique designed to provoke a reaction. The suspect becomes agitated, his voice rising. He denies everything, his denials laced with profanity. For hours they go back and forth, a psychological tug-of-war under the harsh glare of the overhead light. The detectives are skilled, experienced. They push and pull, trying to find a crack in his facade. But the man never breaks. He sticks to his story, a messy, inconsistent story, but one he clings to with frantic desperation. In the end, they have nothing concrete to hold him on, no physical evidence, no confession. They are forced to let him go. It is another dead end, another frustrating chapter in a book that seems to have no final page. Years bleed into one another. The world changes. Presidents come and go, fashions evolve, technology leaps forward. But in a dusty corner of the Manor Township Police Department, the case file for Lindy Sue Biechler remains open. For Detective Miller, it becomes more than just another unsolved case. It becomes a personal ghost. Long after his official retirement, he would find himself in his study late at night, the old, thick files spread out before him. The smell of aging paper would fill the room as he once again stared at the crime scene photographs. The images, faded now, have lost none of their power to shock. He would trace the lines of the evidence logs, the dead-end witness statements, the transcripts of failed interrogations. He would stare at Lindy Sue's high school portrait, her bright, hopeful smile, a silent accusation. He had promised her family he would find the man who did this. It was a promise he had failed to keep, a weight that settled heavier on his shoulders with each passing year. He would map out the victimology again, the method of the attack, trying to see it with fresh eyes, to find the one detail, the one connection that he and dozens of other officers had missed over the decades. But there was nothing. The file was a monument to failure, a labyrinth with no exit. The killer had simply vanished, dissolved back into the fabric of society, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of pain and a question that echoed in the silence of the detective's late-night study. Who are you? Then, at the dawn of a new century, a scientific miracle begins to unfold in laboratories and courtrooms across the country. DNA, the very blueprint of life, becomes the most powerful tool in the history of law enforcement. For cold cases like Lindy Sue's, it is a resurrection. Evidence that had sat dormant in storage lockers for decades suddenly holds the potential to speak, to identify the ghosts of the past. In 2019, a new generation of investigators at the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office, armed with this revolutionary technology, decides to take another look at the Biechler case. They submit the evidence from the 1975 crime scene, specifically semen left by the killer on Lindy Sue's underwear, for modern analysis. A full DNA profile is successfully extracted. This is the killer's genetic signature, his indelible, undeniable calling card, preserved for 44 years. The profile is run through CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database, but there is no match. The killer is not a convicted felon whose DNA is already on file. For a moment, it seems like another dead end, but this is where the revolution truly begins. They turn to Paraben Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company pioneering the field of investigative genetic genealogy. This cutting-edge technique uses the killer's DNA to find his relatives by searching public, direct-to-consumer DNA databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, sites where ordinary people upload their profiles to find long-lost cousins and build their family trees. A genealogist named C.C. Moore, a master of this new science, is assigned the case. She uploads the killer's genetic profile and begins the hunt. It is like building a family tree, but in reverse. Instead of starting with a person and building outward, she starts with the anonymous DNA and tries to build a family tree inward, toward the unknown subject. The process is a Herculean task of digital detective work. The system finds distant cousins of the killer, third, fourth, even fifth cousins, who share small segments of his DNA. C.C. Moore begins to build vast, sprawling family trees around these matches, meticulously tracing lineages back through generations, looking for a point where the different family lines intersect. It's a process that requires not just scientific acumen, but historical research, combing through birth certificates, marriage licenses, census records, and obituaries. For months, she navigates a labyrinth of human history. Then she finds a significant pattern. A large number of the distant relatives trace their ancestry back to a specific small town in southern Italy. This geographic clue is the breakthrough she needs. It dramatically narrows the search. She can now focus on families who emigrated from this town and settled in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The net begins to tighten. The sprawling family trees start to converge, their branches twisting and connecting until they point, with astonishing precision, to one couple. From there, she builds the tree forward, identifying their children and grandchildren. And on one of those branches, she finds a name, David Sinopoli. A man who was 26 years old in 1975, who lived in Lancaster, and who, according to her genealogical work, had to be the source of the DNA. The name is a thunderclap in the 47-year-old investigation. David Sinopoli. He is not a phantom. He is a local man, now in his early 70s, who has been living a quiet, unremarkable life for decades, just a few miles from the scene of the crime. He had a family, a job, he was a neighbor, he was a ghost hiding in plain sight. But a genealogical conclusion, however strong, is not enough to secure an arrest warrant. The investigators need a direct DNA sample from Sinopoli himself to make a conclusive match. And so begins the final delicate act of the long investigation, a covert surveillance operation. Undercover officers begin to tail David Sinopoli. They watch his house, they follow him as he runs errands, goes to appointments, lives out the mundane routines of his life, completely oblivious to the fact that the invisible net of justice, woven from strands of his own DNA, is closing in around him. The investigators need him to discard something, anything that will contain his genetic material, a cigarette butt, a used tissue, a water bottle. The opportunity arrives on a seemingly ordinary day in February 2022. Investigators follow Sinopoli to the Philadelphia International Airport, where he is dropping someone off. After he goes inside, they watch as he stops at a kiosk, buys a coffee, and sits down. He takes a few sips. Then, as he leaves, he tosses the paper cup into a public trash can. It is the moment they have been waiting for. As soon as he is gone, an officer moves in and retrieves the cup. It is a simple, disposable object, a piece of trash that most people wouldn't give a second glance. But in the hands of the investigators, it is the Holy Grail. It is the key that will finally unlock the 47-year-old mystery. The cup is carefully bagged and rushed to a state forensic lab. The tension is palpable as they await the results. Technicians swab the rim of the cup, where his saliva and his DNA would be. They process the sample and compare it to the profile from the 1975 crime scene. The result is a perfect one-to-one match. There is no doubt. After 17,386 days of mystery, they have found Lindy Sue Biechler's killer. On a quiet Sunday morning in July of 2022, David Sinopoli is at home in his quiet, suburban neighborhood. The ordinary peace of the morning is broken by a firm, authoritative knock on his front door. When he opens it, he is met not by a neighbor or a delivery person, but by a team of detectives. As they place him under arrest for the murder of Lindy Sue Biechler, the 73-year-old man shows no emotion, his face a blank mask. The news of his arrest explodes like a bomb in the Lancaster community. To those who knew him, he was just an ordinary, quiet retiree. The revelation that this unassuming neighbor was harboring such a monstrous secret is a chilling, terrifying thought. For Lindy Sue's surviving family, the news is a tidal wave of emotion, grief, raw and fresh, as if it were 1975 all over again, but also a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. The ghost that had haunted their lives for nearly 5 decades finally had a name and a face. Confronted with the irrefutable scientific certainty of the DNA evidence, David Sinopoli's decades of silence come to an end. He pleads guilty to the murder. This plea means there will be no lengthy trial, no agonizing process of presenting evidence and cross-examining witnesses, but it does mean there will be a sentencing, a final day in court where the full weight of his crime can be laid bare. On that day, the courtroom is a somber, heavy place. Lindy Sue's family and friends sit in the pews, their faces etched with the pain of a lifetime of grief. David Sinopoli, now an old man in a prison jumpsuit, is a pathetic, hollowed-out figure, a stark contrast to the vicious predator he was in 1975. Lindy Sue's sister steps forward to give a victim impact statement. Her voice, though trembling, is filled with a strength forged over 47 years of waiting. She speaks not to the judge, but directly to Sinopoli. For 47 years, she begins, you have lived a life. You had a wife, children, holidays, birthdays. You got to experience all the things you stole from my sister. While we were trapped in an endless winter of grief, wondering who could have done this, you were free. You walked our same streets. You shopped in our same stores. You were a monster hiding behind a mask of normalcy. The prosecutor then rises to address the court. Your Honor, he says, his voice ringing with conviction, this is a case about a promise made to a grieving family in 1975 that we would not forget Lindy Sue. It is a case about the tireless dedication of generations of law enforcement. But most of all, it is a case about the power of truth. The truth in this case was written in the victim's own body. It was a message left for science to one day read. Today, science has delivered its verdict. The judge, his face grim, sentences David Sinopoli to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he is led away in handcuffs, a chapter of profound pain and mystery in Lancaster County is finally, mercifully, closed. The conviction of David Sinopoli did more than just solve a single murder. It closed a wound that had been open in the heart of the community for nearly 50 years. For decades, the Biechler case was a local legend, a ghost story told to frightened teenagers, a cautionary tale for parents. It was a symbol of a time when the town's innocence was shattered. The resolution brought a collective sigh of relief, reaffirming a belief that justice, no matter how long it is delayed, can eventually prevail. The case has become a landmark in the annals of forensic science, a powerful testament to the revolutionary potential of investigative genetic genealogy. It stands as a beacon of hope for countless other families of cold case victims across the country, a demonstration that a killer's own genetic code can become his ultimate betrayer. But beyond the science and the headlines, the legacy of this case is the memory of the young woman at its center. Lindy Sue Biechler is no longer just the victim in Lancaster's most infamous unsolved murder. She is remembered now not for the brutal way she died, but for the vibrant way she lived. A beloved daughter, a cherished sister, a loving wife, a kind friend, a young woman who loved flowers and whose bright, promising life was a gift stolen far too soon. Her story is a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of life and a powerful testament to the unwavering, unconquerable power of truth.